my video got edited or cut short. I hit a button. Um, so I don't know where I got cut off. So what I was talking about though was age of the earth and desertification. So, and what I was saying was that with the term desertification, we know that our deserts grow every year. So if our desert is growing every year, if you go back in time, it's shrinking every year, getting smaller. So if you go back to when we lived around the pyramids in Egypt, like the Hebrew time, um, and everyone says, "Oh, they were in that desert, living in the desert." They didn't live in a desert. That wouldn't have been a desert back then. That would have been big, lush green pastures and fields all around Egypt. There was a desert beside them that was slowly growing and going to consume them, which would have been the plagues and all that stuff. Like that was probably the start of the desert coming in to the main capital and killing off all the crops and killing the ground, and the ground getting to that wornness as the desert grows. And the desert grows from a permanent, strong westerly wind in an area. That's all I know about it. I don't know all the details of where that wind comes from or why there's a strong westerly wind in that area permanently, and why there's only small areas like that. But if the world were billions of years old, like they say, then the oldest desert on Earth would be at least 100,000 years old. There would at least be one continent on Earth that would be fully desert. Right? Each desert that we have would be that much bigger. So it would be so much bigger that the world would be that much more uninhabitable. It's hard to fucking understand, but I hope you're getting there. Anyway, so desertification, we can use that, and our oldest desert's 4,000 years old. Drilling into the glaciers, we can do that, and our oldest glacier was 4,000 years old. Reading the Bible, we can do that, and we can use the lineage in Genesis to figure out exactly how old the earth is and when the flood was. And the flood was about 4,000 years ago. Things are lining right up, aren't they? And all scientifically lining up, right? So then the flood was 4,000 years ago. The desert was 4,000 years ago. The glacier was 4,000 years ago. I'll bet you that the carbon that I was talking about earlier, the negative carbon 14, was only about 6,000 years ago. Maybe 7. Because we are in the end times. So, all this to say, we haven't aged anything on this planet. Nothing has a date stamped on it. Dinosaurs, none of it. The dates that we arbitrarily put on things don't make any sense. There's no fucking way that we can have the billions of years. We just can't. It's impossible. We couldn't even have the 1 million because of carbon dating being a congruent mathematical equation. Yet alone billions and billions. So, and things are lining up with the Bible. Now, you still have Grand Canyon, and they say, oh, it took billions of years to form Grand Canyon. The Colorado River cut through the mountain. Well, the Colorado River is at a lower altitude than the top of the Grand Canyon. At the top of the Colorado River isn't high enough to get to the top of the Grand Canyon. So the water never could have run, even if you filled in the Grand Canyon. The Colorado River never would have ran over the Grand Canyon. It would have had to fill up a lake behind it until it overflowed. And then it could have cut the Grand Canyon through. And if you've ever made it like a dam in a ditch when you were a kid, you'll know that once the water comes over the top, it doesn't take any time to cut a major hole all the way to the base of the dam, right through level with the river so that it can flow through easy. And it'll just do it in seconds. And that all the sediment of that cut will wash away so far that you wouldn't even know that it was filled in at any time. Now, if a river cuts a path by itself, like if it cuts its way deeper, what it does is when it gets to the mouth of the river, it dumps that sediment off because it can't carry it. When it gets out to sea, there's so much other current going on that the river current can't carry the sediment anymore, and it dumps it off, and it's called a delta. Colorado River doesn't have a delta. There's no pile of dirt at the end of the Grand Canyon that says that the Grand Canyon was ever filled in, which is evidence that it was cut quickly by overflow. And we've actually found the shoreline of the lakes that the Grand Canyon would have created. And there were 2 lakes, and it was 3 states that were gone underwater. Taking that water out of the ocean drops the ocean levels enough that you'd have been able to walk everywhere on Earth. So my guess is that the Grand Canyon never released its water, and there's a bunch of them all over the Earth, by the way. Grand Canyon's it's the biggest. But there's other canyons and other lakes that have drained over time. So anyway, that's cut. All that sediment goes into the ocean, number one, but also all that water raising the levels of the ocean, so that then you couldn't walk anywhere on Earth. So at that point, things on like the Galapagos Islands and Australia would have been protected from predators. Same goes for the 10 lost tribes of Israel. They would have gotten pushed to the point of we found the walking trail going from Europe to North America. And we found like the tire tracks and the footprints underwater. It's under like 20 or 30 feet of water or something like that. It's under a lot of water at low tide. So that's where, if you took that amount of Grand Canyon water out of the ocean, that would just be enough to drop things enough that they'd have been able to walk right across there. And then the Grand Canyon opened up, flooding in the ocean, raising up the levels, cutting off the path, and protecting them. So when I'm sure Columbus was looking for them, that's probably about the time the Grand Canyon would have been cut. Maybe like a little before Columbus time, but like probably when he was a little kid. or maybe just before he was born. You know, his grampy probably told him about the day the ocean fucking swallowed up a bunch of houses that were on the coast. You can imagine there would have been a tidal wave, a tsunami, one would think, that would have cut across from that, all that water being pushed into the ocean all at the same time. Would have made an impact, and then people would have noticed, like if you were going to the beach every day and then all of a sudden the beach is moved whatever 50 feet or 100 feet or whatever up the coastline, you know, you're going to notice that. So I'm sure there were people who noticed that, and then they, you know, put two and two together, that the lost tribes of Israel just disappeared, right? And they wandered after the second diaspora. They were pushed north because the attack came from the east, pushing in toward the west, pushing two tribes south, and the other 10 tribes pushed north. Well, they would have went to like France and Italy and Ireland, whatever, and all that's already all populated by people, and they would have been like, no, you can't fucking settle here, get it, beat it, you know. And then they would have went to like Russia and all those places, and they would have been like, no, man, you can't stay here, beat it. And especially those areas, because those were like Edomites, right? And they'd have been like, no, fuck you, you get out of here. And made it to like China and Asia and places like that, and they'd have been like, no, man, you can't stay here. Obviously, they took some brides, or at least something happened there, because the Native Americans, you can clearly tell, are a cross between Asians and Hebrews. Anyway, so they picked up some wives, probably all along the way. They probably picked up wives here, there, and everywhere, and dropped off wives as far as that goes. Though the Hebrews wouldn't drop off too many wives, because that was way against their thing to breed outside of religion, but they would have been able to bring in the Asians. They probably, that culture is different but similar, a lot of the morals and stuff like that, so they probably converted a few of them, took them as slaves, and then they would have had, what did they call them, concubines. That's what they would have taken them as, and then they would have had children through those concubines, but they wouldn't have been the Hebrew children, whatever. Anyway, obviously, they took some Asians. And then they would have went north, found the trail, kept going, and they've been traveling west at that point, and come into North America, way up top. Probably a few of them said, no, fuck that, I'm not walking anymore. We found land, I'm staying here. And those would be Eskimos. And then the rest of them were like, fuck that, we're going south, it's too fucking cold here. And go a little south, and they get into the Canada area, and a lot of them would have just said, no, this is nice enough, fuck that, man, we're good. And a lot of them would have just said, no, man, we're going to keep going south, this is too fucking cold. And some of them would have went south just to see, right? Just curiosity would have sent you south. Making the rest of the Native American tribes, eventually getting down into the Mexican Mayan area, making all of those tribes and making all of those, finding the pyramids that the Mayans lived around and stuff like that, which were built by the Nephilim. All of the pyramids were built by the Nephilim way before we fucking Egypt. um, so they found those, and there is a great many benefits to living around a pyramid. All plants and animals all have a higher cell count. You heal faster. Chronic pain heals. You can you're mentally more uplifted. Like things like depression and anxiety just seem to lift. There are a great many things to living around a pyramid that can be wonderful. So once they found a pyramid, also knowing from Egypt all those benefits of living around a pyramid, when they found the Mayan, they would have obviously moved in, right? And became the Mayans, even though they're still the Hebrews. We found the breastplate, or make of the breastplate. And that's why when Columbus came over, he had to bring Hebrew translators in order to talk to the natives. They had to use Hebrew. So there you go. That's Age of the Earth science destroyed. The Bible initiated as a science book instead of a fucking fairy tale like we're told. And all those so-called science books in your textbooks in school are the fucking fairy tales that we shouldn't live by because they're heathen. Have a good one.